Our nation's story begins with ideals of freedom and equality. But the reality is that while our founding fathers spoke a lot about freedom, they built the majority of their wealth on the backs of enslaved people. Cotton, a valuable crop, fueled this system. Enslaved people endured brutal conditions, forced to work long hours under the constant threat of violence. But even with slavery abolished, the fight for equal rights was far from over. In the South, the Jim Crow laws kept Black Americans separate and unequal. They faced discrimination in every aspect of life, including voting. By the 1960s, the fight for voting rights had reached a critical point. One man, John Lewis, decided to stand up for change. He believed in nonviolent protest. In 1965, he and other organized activists marched from Selma to Montgomery to demand voting rights. On March 7th, about 600 marchers, including John Lewis, began crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. They were met by a wall of state troopers armed with clubs and tear gas.
And a young man walking beside me by the name of Jose William from Dr. King's organization said, "Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray before we can pass word back for people to kneel and pray." The major said, "Troopers advance." And you saw these men putting on their gas masks.
Then, without warning, the troopers attacked. Tear gas filled the air. John Lewis was beaten to the ground, his skull fractured by a police baton.
I thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die. I thought it was the last nonviolent protest for me. I don't recall how I made it back across that bridge. And someone asked me to say something, and I stood up and said something like, "I don't understand it, how President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam and cannot send troops to Selma, Alabama to protect people who only desires to register to vote."
The nation was shocked. The day became known as Bloody Sunday. Just 2 weeks later, on March 21st, which also happens to be my birthday, a much larger group of activists made the journey from Selma to Montgomery. Over 6,000 people, both black and white, marched together across the bridge, demanding justice. The events of Bloody Sunday helped to spark widespread support for the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which outlawed discriminatory voting practices. John Lewis dedicated his life to fighting for civil rights and equality. His courage and determination helped change America. While we've made a lot of progress since 1965, there are surprisingly many white supremacists in America, even today. The story of John Lewis and Bloody Sunday reminds us that every voice matters and that we must always stand up for what is right.